No matter which class, spec and game mode we prefer, what weapons we choose and what we despise, we all as larger Guild Wars 2 community share one thing in common. We love our game. And that love, even though pure and genuine, can often cloud our judgment when it comes to our beloved game's failures and shortcomings. Sure, we're not completely blind to its problems. The calls to balance team to quote, fix the game have been loud and have been constant, but they also tend to ignore what the process of fixing the game would require. And therefore, once the balance team starts doing what they were bloody asked to, fixing the game, the community rallies against them in defense of a game-breaking mechanic because it was a part of the class identity. I'm only using an example of transfusion here to portray the overarching problem. There are multiple dozens of skills and mechanics spanning across the entirety of Guild Wars 2 that are either completely unfair, impossible to balance, more harmful than beneficial to the game, and sometimes just more wonky than Willy Wonka and his fat ass himself. Either because the sheer concept was utter horseshit, or its implementation is just botched, or some detail somewhere in its mechanics makes it extremely abusable. And most of those skills and mechanics have die-hard fans, or are ingrained so deep they became crucial to some classes' functioning, so there will be many people willing to die on the hill of defending those mechanics, no matter how retarded of a hill that is. And that's for a simple reason. I am the only person on this planet with enough brain damage to suggest nerfing his own main for the sake of game health. If you also want some brain damage, consider checking out Bullshit Brigade's Discord server, where we'll gladly share ours, or consider supporting through Patreon my efforts to enhance aforementioned damage. Circling back to Guild Wars 2, I'm woefully convinced that the game might be unfixable, as too many mechanics that have been here since day one or since Heart of Taunts would have to be reworked or removed. I'm guessing no one needs the introduction to Distortion or Shield of Courage, or by lesser extension Warrior's Stances. Distortion makes the user completely immune to all damage, all negative effects and all CC for the duration, whilst more often than not allowing full range of motion whilst invulnerable. Shield of Courage, on the other hand, blocks everything coming from front of you, and because you can tend to face the opponent, in most 1v1s you wouldn't take the bloody damage whatsoever. Stances are lesser of evils, as each of them has some clear weakness, like Endure Pain still leaving you susceptible to condition damage and CC, or Balance Stance only reducing only power damage taken. And both Berserker Stance and Frenzy provide no defensive benefit whatsoever, with only Defiant Stance being on the same level of bullshit as Distortion by turning all damage taken into healing. The difference, however, is that Warrior's Defiant Stance is just a heal skill, one of many, and not necessarily the best one at that. Distortion and Courage are on the other hand class mechanics, ingrained deeply into the classes that use them. If we nerf Defiant Stance, which ArenaNet did, Warrior can just swap to a different skill and be relatively fine. If we nerf Shield of Courage, Dragon Hunter cannot swap to a different skill, so he'd be permanently hindered by such change. If we nerf Distortion, entire Mesmer population gets affected, meaning there's no way in hell to adjust that mechanic without going to war with every Mesmer on the planet. And it doesn't matter that 7 Virtuosos is the meta for PvE raid clearing, or that every Mesmer spec in PvP and World v World has shorter average time to kill than available Distortion uptime, and that Distortion can be cast mid-CC. No Mesmer main will ever agree that Distortion should be removed from the game. As of current, Mesmer is built and balanced around having unfair mechanics as core of his identity. Fixing Guild Wars 2 as bringing it to healthy state of the game would have to include ground-up rework of Mesmer as a class. I do not think Mesmer mains would really like that. But not just them. Every class or spec, depending on playstate independent defensive skills, like the aforementioned Shield of Courage or Warrior stances, would have to be looked at and quite probably receive some sort of functionality tweak that would come with high possibility of upsetting each respective spec's player base. Because, as much as abilities like Distortion make combat temporarily unfair and one-sided, they have been so normalized that they're completely, fully accepted as they are, without the consideration for the fact that abilities of such magnitude would probably end up on an ultimate in any competitive game other than Guild Wars 2. And here they are, as a core mechanic that can have its cooldown be reset or achieve considerably high uptime, because the F in Guild Wars 2 stands for fun. But not to overfixate on Mesmer, let's use him as a trampoline to talk a little bit about stealth. Stealth in Guild Wars 2 is one of, if not the worst implementation of this mechanic I have ever seen in a video game. And believe you me, I have seen more horse shit than your stereotypical rancher. But nothing of course takes the cake from the game where use of a damaging skill doesn't break invisibility. In fact, missing the hit or hitting a block doesn't break the stealth either. Only fully connecting the hit and dealing damage with a skill will break invisibility. That essentially means that if player fighting an invisible foe manages to predict them and dodge or block the opening strike, he is being punished for predicting well, by not only wasting a dodge or cooldown, but also allowing the enemy to stay hidden and re-engage at will. And if he doesn't predict the enemy, he takes damage of course. Which creates a lose-lose scenario that's incredibly unfun to deal with and quite frankly shouldn't be in the bloody game to begin with. On top of which, that problem is exacerbated by the fact that every dingleberry and their goulash can access stealth, even if that's not part of their class's general toolkit, as all smoke fields in the game grant said stealth indiscriminately. So you can have the lose-lose stealth mind game experience against a rampaging warrior, because why the fuck not? In fact, in game modes such as World v World, you'd have to have a cheat engine installed and running just to know for certain whether or not there isn't entire fucking enemy Zerg in stealth right in front of you, as currently only in-game warning of such danger you'd get are dropping frames. Now riddle me this. How many Ranger, Mesmer, Thief or even NG mains would react allergically to any mention of potentially reworking stealth in Guild Wars 2? Huh? But that aside, problems with stealth are also enhanced by the fact that certain classes have quite stupid amounts of on-demand access to it. And by certain classes, I mostly mean Thief. Thief's class mechanic, that is, replacing all weapon skill cooldowns with a singular resource bar, is the best possible example to why Revenant still has cooldowns despite also depending on resource bar for casting skills. Every other class has its best tools gated or limited behind timers, meaning each individual button has lesser impact on its gameplay, and even if something is abusable and overpowered, it's only abusable once per interval. In this regard, Thief is playing a completely separate game to everyone else. His damage rotation in PvE encounters for almost since the dawn of time was just holding down whichever button does highest DPS and auto-attacking when out of initiative. Meanwhile, in versus modes, every weapon skill Thief has is essentially spammable, and there are no brakes on this roller coaster, so every unfun, unfair, dogshit interaction Thief players could find eventually became the core of his gameplay through player behaviors, and ArenaNet balanced the class accordingly, meaning Thief is now forced to rely on said unfun, unfair mechanics because he was balanced to compensate for having them. To make Thief in any ways bearable to deal with, we'd have to rework the class, starting with initiative, rework stealth, rework probably most of his weapons, and rebalance the entire bloody thing. And imagine the response you'd get from a Thief main if you suggested that.
I'm going to shit yourself.
Now, let's pick up the pace a little bit. Do you consider a Dragon Hunter arriving on a side node with spammable blocks and ages, including ages giving you ages, up to 10 seconds of block from 2 casts of Shield of Courage, and a consecration skill lasting up to 7 seconds that blocks projectiles, heals allies inside, and prevents enemy from standing in it, combined with Hammer 5 ward for a total of 12 seconds, during which enemy pretty much cannot access the point without burning stability, and on top of that, he has a heal skill which is a hard block. Imagine what a wholesome, jolly experience must fighting that thing be. Oh wait, you don't have to. If you queue ranked, you have a chance of experiencing it yourself. Moving on. Say hi to Necromancer. Problem with Necromancer is a little simpler to explain. It is just a class without hard blocks or either similarly efficient damage mitigation in a game that revolves around this kind of mitigation being the main and only way you can stay alive. Not to mention, Necro can be forced out of his fucking class mechanic with damage pressure. The closest thing Necro has to a good defense is Infusing Terror, which only reduces damage taken. Even with all defensive skills Necromancer can master, he still doesn't have enough damage mitigation and not enough shroud health to function properly within an average teamfight. And on the other hand, it has too much health to be bearable to fight against in a 1v1. The amount of health you need as a health-based drain tank to survive in a teamfight and to survive in a 1v1 are just two very different numbers. The way Necro is designed right now, he can either be underpowered health-wise in teamfight or overpowered in 1v1s, because the less damage he takes, the longer he can stay in Shroud, meaning he gets much higher Shroud uptime in 1v1 than he does in teamfights. And Shroud is his bloody class mechanic, which enables majority of his bloody damage. Necromancer needs a rework to how Shroud functions to ever be actually balanceable in the first place, let alone actually balanced. And ArenaNet realized this with Scourge and Harbinger. That's why they don't have conventional Shroud. They have a wholly different set of shit waffles, but not Shroud. As you can see, even just by skimming on the surface, we're finding design issues reaching as far as the Heart of Thorns and even the bloody day one of game's existence, and we are far from done. We could bow over Ranger's pet AI, as an example of something which drastically needs getting looked at. Or the fact that it can do more CC from downstate in 5 seconds than Weaver can throughout entire ride encounter, because pets are definitely implemented into the game in the way God intended. This applies to Mechanist as well. But quite frankly, the Shrekstone Warcrime deserves its own video, goddammit, with what's wrong with it as a concept, let alone in practice. And we can't talk about Mechanist without considering the rest of the Engineer, and currently the only competitively viable strategy Engineer has left is Stealth Cheese and throwing grenades. Engineer as a whole is lying face down, bleeding out in our goulash, in need of immediate medical attention, but no one dares to do anything about it because Stealth Cheese and Grenade Kit exists, and those two will immediately get out of control if Engineer receives the attention it deserves. Before we can pull Engie out of the goulash and nurture him back to health, we'd have to amputate the Stealth Cheese and Grenade spam, so they won't immediately become overpowered. How about you fly that idea before some Engie main aware of how deep in the gutter his class is and garner his reaction? Spoiler alert! This is a pattern that repeats with almost every class in competitive game modes, and even some broader game mechanics. Push is impossible to ever be functional, so long rallying on kills is still in this game. Thief will never be balanced, so long stealth isn't reworked. Every instance of shadow step or teleportation that disobeys lines of sight should be strongly considered for rework or replacement. Every player state independent block or immunity should be strongly considered for rework or replacement. All of the cooldown shenanigans, be it traits reducing skill cooldowns or initiative, need to either be completely removed from the game, or in initiative's case probably turned into something closer to how Revenant operates, because it's a complete travesty with how it is right now. And the biggest of problems is what I was alluding to from the very beginning. This game is unfixable because the community will rather watch it die at the hands of mechanics squeezing life of it than allow for the painful yet necessary healing process of reworking or removing these mechanics, because they are a part of the class identity, like transfusion was. Was Scourge's class identity really the fact that it makes every PvE encounter trivial, boring and reductive? Was it really something worth keeping? Or is Mesmer's identity the fact that the class is completely built and balanced around being unfair to both play as and against? Do we really want to keep that? Or maybe Thief, being a sack of stealth spamming shadow step exploiting shit, is also something worth preserving? Fuck it! Mace condition Berserker. Its identity is being completely fucking uninteractive piece of minced human garbage that one-shots all but bunker builds with one fucking button spammed on repeat. Do we want to preserve that because it's a class identity? I'd say no. I said on the day this shite released that Akim Relic shouldn't exist in the game and Skull Grinder shouldn't apply conditions. And I'm the one playing this goddamn shit. We are keeping plus minus 17 equivalents of aggressive super cancer within this game, either because they are a backbone of a class or a part of its identity or a blank mechanic like rallying is. All the things that are harmful to the game should not be excused because of class identity. And the same things should not be tolerated because other class does something stupid as well. When Spear Spellbreaker happened to be literally immortal and deal nuclear levels of damage, no one worried about hurting its class identity or cried that "But TF? TF has stealth! It's more cancer! Wee!" It is finally the bloody time for the Guild Wars 2 community to take their collective heads out of their collective asses and decide whether they prefer this game to go through the painful but necessary process of curing the cancer that's killing it, or remain as it is, on the slow, steady pace, marching towards inevitable death of its both competitive modes. This game needs a fundamentals up rework to 3 classes, and rework adjacent amount of changes to 4 more, with only Revenant needing minor functionality changes, but still needing them. Entire blanket game mechanics, like rally mechanic, like stealth, like boons and conditions, also need rework. We see it left and right, to the point when devs openly state that they regret putting quickness and alacrity in the game at all. And yet, we have heaps and heaps of people who lie to themselves and pretend there is no problem whatsoever, just because they tied their entire personality and ego to an arbitrary meaningless number on a scoreboard, and will rather see this game die or degrade into PvE only experience than let their fucking class stop being a toxic nuisance. TLDR of this video. There's so many mechanics in Guild Wars 2 that shouldn't be conceived in the first place, so much shit that wouldn't fly anywhere else, that getting this game to any healthy state would take drastic measures that cannot be employed without uproar from the community, which is hellbent on keeping every cancer cell within the body of this game alive and well, because their favorite class identity would be hurt. Bitch, what class identity would be lost if this Toad just didn't let you kill people while invulnerable, or if stealth wasn't more bugged than fucking Helldivers playthrough? On the completely unrelated note, I'm slowly reaching the point where I'll have to either limit my exposure to Guild Wars 2 or take a few weeks break from it. As if I keep playing the Willbender Daredevil Virtuoso Condi Herald shit sandwich at its current meta as my main game until January, I'm going to go and test falling damage off of a fucking bridge. But still, I enjoy making videos a little too much, so expect some non-Guild Wars 2 related content to appear on the channel in between Guild Wars 2 related releases. I'm not quitting this game, just taking precautionary measures against losing my bloody mind. And I will still upload Guild Wars 2 videos so long there's 2 people on this earth willing to watch them, one being myself. Nonetheless, let's close out this miserable performance with a warm sign of gratitude towards all the generous patron supporters who continuously consider my incoherent yapping worth their money. You're all truly welcome. Crabface out.